Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to start a reading vlog for the third of the new to me authors I want to try this year. So I'm using these vlogs to read books that have been on my radar for way too long. I started out this year with Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and I also read Passing by Nella Larson. This is now the third book this year, Mrs Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And I have no idea what this book is about. It is set in the 20s, I guess, or at least it came out in the 1920s. And I think it is set in London. And we'll just see, we'll just experience it together. I have no idea what to expect from this, but I hope I will like it. I just checked on Goodreads and a lot of people that have similar taste to me have given it like 2 or 3 stars, but I hope that I will love it. So I'll let you know how it goes. I will update you when I reach the 25% mark, the 50% mark, the 75% mark. And then when I finish the book, and then I'll probably also read like the introduction and stuff like that, because I just want to go into it blind for now and then read that last. So yeah, let's do this. So I'm now 25% into Mrs. Dalloway, and I still don't really know what's going on. The writing style of this is definitely a challenge for me. It is very stream of conscious, and you're just jumping from character to character in a way. So Mrs. Dalloway is definitely our main character. Her name is Clarissa, and she's in her 50s. And we're basically following a day where she's hosting a party, and she's meeting with an old friend, Peter Welsh, who has once proposed to her, but she did not marry him. And so he went to India and he is now returned and tells her that he is going through a divorce, which at this point in time was probably still quite a big deal. So we see these two characters and their relationship, which is very strained in a way because he remembers her refusal, and at the same time she seems to be very glad that she hasn't married him, especially now that he wants to get a divorce from his actual wife. And at the same time you can feel that they can't be without each other in a way. So it's definitely interesting, but we're jumping into the heads of a couple of other characters as well, where I don't really know if that is just something that happens so that some commentary can be made, or whether any of these characters will actually be important again. So yeah, it's very intriguing, but definitely hard to grasp. I feel reminded a little bit of my reading of The Great Gatsby, because I also didn't really understand what was going on. Now, this book has notes in the back, and I'm actually reading the notes as I go along, because I hope that it will help me get some of the references. But yeah, we'll see. I'm gonna keep reading, and I'll let you know how I feel when I've reached the halfway point. Also, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a mess today, but we get a little bit of a part in this book where Mrs. Dalloway is thinking back on a relationship that she had with a woman, and she calls it love. So this has some sapphic tendencies. I'm very intrigued to read the introduction when I'm done, because so far I'm lacking like all information about this book. So yeah, it will be interesting to see whether this is brought up again or whether this is discussed in the introduction, but it's definitely intriguing. So I'm now halfway through a Mrs. Dalloway, and the second part was definitely interesting because we're following our male characters a little bit more. So while we saw Peter from Clarissa's point of view first, we then get the point of view of Peter himself, and we kind of see how he perceives himself, which I thought was very interesting to contrast the two and to see also how Peter perceives Clarissa in turn. So, yeah, I thought that was just an interesting kind of change of perspective, and it just illustrates how we're all like in our heads and we can't really escape that, I guess. And then it also talked more about mental health because we have this character of Septimus, and he was in the First World War, and he is definitely struggling with that. So probably today we would say he has post-traumatic stress, but during that time mental health wasn't really a big thing. Like, people didn't really treat it well, I guess. So that's something we take a look at in this second part as well. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I'm intrigued to see how these storylines connect. Like, is there any connection between Septimus and Clarissa? We will see. But yeah, I'm definitely enjoying this, even though it is a little bit hard to follow, but it's not too hard. So I am enjoying it, and I will let you know what I think once I'm a little bit further in. Okay, so I made it 75% through Mrs. Dalloway. And the next thing that we got was a little bit of insight into Mrs. Dalloway's daughter Elizabeth and her teacher. I don't know how I feel about this part because for me it was a little bit random. Like, the teacher woman is poor. She's also of German descent, and it just felt a little bit like she was portrayed in the worst possible light, and I don't know how I feel about that. Like, what was the purpose of this? I don't know. But after that, we get another part about Septimus. And then, right where I stopped reading now, something quite tragic has happened. And I still don't really know how the two storylines connect, so I'm intrigued to see what happens in the last part now, because I'm definitely clueless. I'm also intrigued to now get to the party, which I guess will be kind of the finale of this book. But yeah, I'm still a little bit confused what's really going on here, what the point of this is gonna be, but I'm not enjoying it. It is enjoyable, and I did get into the writing style more. And we'll just see, I guess. We'll finish it and then see, and then read the introduction and see some more. Okay, so I'm out of the bathtub and I finished reading Mrs. Dalloway. And I don't know how I feel about the ending. Like, it was not what I expected. I think it's really odd that we don't end with her, but we end with her in a way. And I just feel like we left her in a moment where I really wanted to know what's going on in her head. And so, yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel yet. And in this last part, we do get the party finally, and I think it is very interesting to look at it in the way that this book does. Like, the main question is, why does she even do it in a way, and her reflections on that, and then just seeing how she behaves during the party and stuff like that. So I will read the introduction now and then probably sleep over it and let you know my final verdict in the morning. So I'm here for my final verdict. I look very disheveled because I just did my yoga and it's so hot right now. So I'm sorry for that, but last night I read the introduction for Mrs. Dalloway just to get some more insight into this work, because I have literally no idea about classics and I can't interpret them and stuff like that. So I always like going back to read these introductions, and this was very interesting. It talked about a lot of things. It talked about the writing process of Virginia Woolf when she wrote this book. She was in her 40s at the time, and I think it is interesting to see that she decided to write about an older woman. Like, if I think about the 1920s, I always think about the youth and what the glam and the glitz and stuff like that. So that was just a very interesting change of perspective, to look at the kind of upper class through the eyes of an already older woman. And the introduction also talked about how this book is about the menopause in a way, because of the age of our main character and the way that this kind of comes close to kind of the end of her life, at least of her like feminine life. And I thought that was a very interesting thought as well. It talked about how during that time the medicalization of women's bodies, and especially the menopause, was on a high, and that's something I'm very interested in just because of my like research perspective as well. So it was just interesting to think back on this book through that lens, I guess. And it also talked about the kind of life cycle of women, how her daughter is now turning 18 or something like that, and is kind of starting her life as a woman, and how that also plays into the kind of thoughts and feelings of Mrs. Dalloway. It talked about how this book portrays that the upper classes are not ready for change, even though their world is changing after the war. And then it talked about how with Septimus we have that portrayal of shell shock. So after the First World War, which was like the first time we have this large-scale industrial war, a lot of the soldiers suffered severely, and it was discussed under that term of shell shock. And so it also talked about that, and kind of a few historical details about that discussion as well, which I thought was very interesting. And then it just talked about how these two characters, Mrs. Dalloway and Septimus, are kind of portrayed against each other. And it was also interesting to read that originally the Prime Minister was kind of supposed to play a much bigger role than what we finally get in this version. So yeah, it was just very fascinating, and overall I decided to give this book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I think I have just a soft spot for 20s fiction, just looking at this society that was changing so much. It just fascinates me. Maybe because we are in a world that now changes so fast, like all the time. But like the 20s was like the first time, I guess, when everything just changed so rapidly in the Western world. I think one thing that I would have liked to see discussed a little bit more is how this book relates to colonialism, because we do have a lot of things that refer back to the colonial times of Britain, because one of our characters, Peter Welsh, just comes back from India. So I might look up whether I can find more on that as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I had a good time. And if you want to pick this book up, I would highly recommend just taking the time to possibly read it all at once. Because of the writing style, it doesn't have chapters, it doesn't have like big breaks. There are maybe like 2 or 3 breaks in the whole book. So just having the time to read this all in one go was very beneficial for my enjoyment. And whenever I did take some breaks, I realized that I just had to get my bearings again once I got back into it. So I would definitely recommend that if you want to read the book. If you have read it, I would love to hear your opinion. And yeah, just leave a nice comment or a like, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!